20 miles. That is the only distance separating one of America's most powerful military air bases from the capital of a country that is secretly, and not so secretly, arming itself with Chinese military technology. 20 miles between the runways of the United States Air Force and the growing shadow of Beijing. And what makes this story different from anything you have heard before, what makes this story genuinely explosive, is this. The country doing all of this is doing it completely in the open. No apology, no denial, no midnight arms deals hidden from the world, just cold, calculated, ruthless strategy from one of the smallest nations on earth. This is the story of the United Arab Emirates. And what Abu Dhabi is doing right now should terrify Washington, fascinate every student of geopolitics, and make every investor watching global defense markets sit up straight. Because this is not just about weapons. This is about the collapse of American military monopoly in the Middle East, the rise of a new global arms order, and what happens when a tiny desert nation built on oil money and strategic genius decides it is done being told what it can and cannot buy. Let us begin with a number, $23 billion. That is how much the United Arab Emirates was supposed to spend on American weapons in a package deal signed at the very end of the Trump administration in late 2020. 50 advanced F-35 stealth fighters, MQ-9B armed drones, precision strike weapon systems. It was the largest proposed arms sale in Emirati history. It was supposed to cement the UAE as America's irreplaceable Arab military partner for the next generation. It was supposed to be the reward that made the Abraham Accords, the historic UAE recognition of Israel, worth the political risk Abu Dhabi took in signing them. And then, in an act of strategic self-destruction that Washington has still not fully reckoned with, the deal fell apart. Not because the UAE walked away, not because they changed their minds, but because Washington said no. The Biden administration halted the deal. The justification they gave was almost insulting in its frankness. American officials told Abu Dhabi that they could not have the F-35 jets until they canceled a 5G communications network deal with Huawei, the Chinese technology company at the center of America's global tech war with Beijing. The message was brutally simple. Choose us or them. Cancel the Chinese contract and you get the jets. Keep the Chinese contract and you get nothing. And what happened next changed the entire military equation of the Middle East in ways that Washington is still struggling to understand and control. The United Arab Emirates did not beg. They did not panic. They did not flood Washington with desperate diplomatic phone calls. Instead, they did something far more consequential. They picked up the phone and called Beijing, and what followed was not a panicked shopping trip. It was the beginning of one of the most sophisticated military hedging strategies any nation has executed in the modern era. To fully understand what the UAE is doing, you need to stand where they are standing, right in the middle, between two superpowers, between two visions for the global order, between American military dominance and Chinese ambition. And rather than being crushed by that position, as most small nations would be, the UAE has somehow turned it into leverage. Extraordinary, almost unprecedented leverage. They have made both superpowers compete for Emirati access, and they have made themselves impossible for either side to simply abandon. The Al Dhafra Air Base sits in the desert 20 miles south of Abu Dhabi. It is home to the United States Air Force's Central Command's 380th Air Expeditionary Wing. American F-35 jets fly from this base. American surveillance aircraft monitor the Persian Gulf from this runway around the clock. American missile defense systems, including the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System known as THAAD, sit on Emirati soil protecting both American military personnel and Emirati cities from Iranian ballistic missile and cruise missile attacks. This is not a new or minor arrangement. The United States and the UAE have operated under a formal defense cooperation agreement since 1994, more than 30 years of official military partnership. American and Emirati troops exercise together every year under programs called Desert Flag, Native Fury, Iron Union, and Iron Defender. They are, by every traditional measure, allies, close allies, the kind of allies who share intelligence and train together and rely on each other in genuine emergencies. And yet, right now, while American pilots sleep at Al Dhafra, while American missile batteries scan the night sky, while American intelligence officers monitor Iranian activity from Emirati territory, the UAE military is simultaneously conducting joint combat training exercises with Chinese J-10C stealth fighters. It is taking delivery of Chinese military technology across multiple categories. U.S. intelligence services assessed that Chinese military personnel were operating inside a UAE military base. And Abu Dhabi is in active, serious discussions to purchase China's most advanced fifth-generation stealth aircraft, the J-20 Mighty Dragon. The exact category of aircraft that Washington just refused to sell them. Think about that for a moment. America refused to sell the UAE a stealth fighter because Washington was worried about Chinese influence over Emirati military affairs. And that refusal pushed the UAE directly into negotiations to buy China's stealth fighter. America's paranoia about Chinese influence created more Chinese influence than any Chinese diplomatic effort could have achieved on its own. This is the central geopolitical irony of the decade in the Middle East, and Washington has nobody to blame but itself. Now let us walk through the weapons. Because the political story only makes sense when you understand the hardware, when you understand what China is selling, why the UAE is buying, and what it all means for the military balance of an already volatile region. The UAE's shift toward Chinese military technology did not happen overnight. It did not begin with the F-35 collapse. It started much earlier, quietly, with drones. When the UAE got deeply involved in the Yemen conflict and needed armed, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones capable of carrying real weapons and striking real targets, they turned to Washington first. Washington said no. American law and policy at the time restricted the export of armed drone technology to a narrow list of close allies. The UAE did not qualify, so Abu Dhabi turned to China, and China delivered. An undisclosed number of Wing Lung 1 and Wing Lung 2 armed drones, China's combat answer to the American Predator and Reaper, arrived in the UAE. They were not stored in warehouses as deterrents. They were deployed operationally, in Yemen, in Libya, in multiple theaters, conducting real strikes. And that moment, that single purchase made necessary by American refusal, cracked open a door between UAE military procurement and Chinese defense industry that has never fully closed and that has swung increasingly wider with every passing year. After the drones came the training jets. In February of 2022, at a UAE defense exhibition, the Emirates signed a deal for 12 Hongdu L-15 Falcon advanced trainer aircraft from China National Aero Technology Import and Export Corporation. The option included 36 additional aircraft, meaning the UAE could eventually operate nearly 50 Chinese fixed-wing military jets. The total monetary value was part of over $544 million in contracts signed across that single trade show. What made this purchase historic was not the price. It was the precedent. For the first time in the UAE's military history, they had bought a Chinese fixed-wing military aircraft. For decades, the Emirati Air Force had been exclusively Western in its combat aviation. French Mirage jets, American F-16 Block 60 aircraft. British-trained pilots, Emirati military officers who graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point and Britain's Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. The UAE Air Force looked, operated, and communicated like a junior NATO partner. And now, for the first time, a Chinese jet with Chinese engines and Chinese avionics was sitting on an Emirati runway. Defense analyst Fahd al-Halabieh described it clearly at the time. He called it a confidence crisis. He said Washington should review its calculations and mend the relationship with the UAE. That was 3 years ago. Washington did not listen carefully enough. Then came December of 2025. And this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary, something that has never happened before in the history of Chinese military power projection. On December 9th, 2025, Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force assets began arriving in the United Arab Emirates for joint military training. Not symbolic flypasts, not diplomatic gestures, real training, sustained combat exercises, mixed formations of Chinese and Emirati pilots flying together in the same airspace, executing the same missions, sharing the same tactical objectives. The exercise was named Falcon Shield 2025. And what China brought to UAE soil announced to the world that Chinese military capability has entered an entirely new era. China deployed its J-10C multi-role fighters, the most advanced fourth-generation combat aircraft in the Chinese inventory, equipped with active, electronically scanned array radar and capable of carrying China's most advanced air-to-air missiles. It deployed its KJ-500 airborne early warning and control aircraft, China's equivalent of the American AWACS, built on a modified Shanxi Y-9 transport airframe, featuring a fixed dorsal radar array capable of detecting aerial targets at ranges approaching 470 kilometers, able to track multiple threats simultaneously while directing friendly aircraft with precision and resilience against electronic jamming. And it deployed YY-20A aerial refueling tankers, extending the operational range of the entire package. The complete deployment, fighters, surveillance command aircraft, tankers, was sent overseas by China for the first time ever to a non-Asian partner. The Chinese Ministry of National Defense confirmed through Senior Colonel Zhang Bin that this was only the third iteration of the Falcon Shield exercises, but the first time these specific high-value assets had ever been deployed to the UAE for training. Senior Colonel Zhang Xiaogang subsequently described the exercises as promoting practical cooperation and helping maintain regional peace. But the military significance was far larger than any diplomatic language could contain. What China demonstrated in December of 2025 was that it now possesses the capability to project complex, sustained, multi-domain air power packages far beyond its own borders. And the UAE just provided the forward operating base to prove it. During those 13 days of Falcon Shield 2025, Chinese and Emirati pilots flew combat sorties in mixed formations. They conducted command and control simulations, replicating real-world threat scenarios. They practiced air superiority combat against simulated enemy aircraft. They trained for night combat operations using night vision equipment. They integrated unmanned aerial vehicles into their combat formations. They rehearsed battlefield search and rescue procedures. This was not theater. This was genuine operational interoperability, the deep military integration that turns two separate air forces into a single functioning combat system. The KJ-500 functioned during those exercises as the central battle management node for combined Chinese-Emirati air operations. It was relaying targeting data in real time, coordinating fighter maneuvers, testing whether Emirati command networks could communicate, share data, and execute tactical decisions alongside Chinese military systems at operational speed. This is the same kind of integration exercise that American AWACS aircraft conduct with NATO partners. The UAE just conducted it with China, while American troops were stationed less than 30 kilometers away. But the Air Force exercises, as extraordinary as they are, represent only one layer of this story. The deeper, more troubling layer involves a ground-based air defense system, a system that reveals how far the UAE's Chinese military relationship has actually extended, and how its consequences are already reshaping conflicts in distant parts of the world. The FK-2000 is a Chinese-designed short-range air defense system manufactured by China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. It is frequently compared to Russia's famous Pantsir S-1. Like the Pantsir, it combines surface-to-air missile capability with automatic cannon fire on a single mobile truck-mounted platform. Each vehicle carries 12 surface-to-air missiles and two 30mm automatic cannons. Its engagement range extends from 1.2 to 25 kilometers in the horizontal dimension, with altitude coverage reaching 12 kilometers. An all-weather radar system enables it to track and engage multiple simultaneous aerial threats, including drones, cruise missiles, helicopters, and fixed-wing aircraft. The UAE bought these systems from China. And then, in the spring of 2025, the situation took a turn that put the entire UAE-China-Africa arms relationship under a spotlight. In April of 2025, it was confirmed that the UAE had transferred 2 FK-2000 units, along with 64 surface-to-air missiles and 6,000 rounds of 30mm cannon ammunition, to the nation of Chad in Central Africa. The transfer was presented as part of a military support agreement signed between the UAE and Chad in 2023, designed to bolster Chadian defenses against terrorism in the volatile Sahel region. On the surface, this read as a Gulf nation helping a struggling African partner. But analysts immediately noted the geography. Chad shares a long border with Sudan, and Sudan, at exactly that moment, was in the grip of one of the world's most catastrophic civil wars. The conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and a powerful paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. The UAE had been repeatedly accused by the United Nations panel of experts on Sudan, by the United States government, and by Amnesty International of supplying weapons to the Rapid Support Forces through arms transfer networks running through Chad, Libya, and other neighboring countries. By August of 2025, Clash Report, a credible open-source military intelligence outlet, was reporting that the FK-2000 systems transferred to Chad had ended up inside Sudanese territory under RSF control. And Amnesty International, in a methodical documented investigation, laid out the broader evidence. Chinese origin-guided bombs bearing the markings of the Chinese state defense company Norinco, manufactured in 2024, were recovered from RSF drone strike sites inside Sudan. One strike in March of 2025 killed at least 13 civilians near the town of Al-Malha in Darfur. In Khartoum, soldiers loyal to the Sudanese armed forces discovered 155mm AH-4 howitzers with Norinco serial numbers. Those howitzers had been sold exclusively to the UAE in 2019. There's only one chain of custody that explains their presence in an active civil war zone in Sudan. They went from a Chinese factory to a UAE warehouse to a conflict zone, in clear violation of a United Nations arms embargo on Darfur that has been in place since 2005. The UAE issued a formal denial through Assistant Minister for Security and Military Affairs, Salem Al-Jabeiri, calling the amnesty allegations baseless and lacking substantiated evidence. But the serial numbers are documented. The manufacturing dates are on record. Chinese weapons manufactured specifically for UAE purchase do not appear in active civil war zones through coincidence. This shadow dimension of the UAE-China arms relationship matters enormously for the broader story, because the same Chinese weapons ecosystem that Abu Dhabi is building for its own military protection, the drones, the air defense systems, the artillery, is simultaneously functioning as a supply chain through which Chinese origin weapons are flowing into active conflicts across the African continent. And Washington, which has spent years lobbying the UAE to distance itself from Chinese military technology, has watched its own refusals to sell accelerate the very problem it was trying to prevent. Now, we need to understand the intelligence dimension, because this story is not simply about a country buying weapons from a rival power. In November of 2025, Middle East Eye published a report citing two former senior American officials speaking on strict condition of anonymity. According to those officials, United States intelligence services had assessed that members of China's People's Liberation Army, actual uniformed Chinese military personnel, were operating inside a UAE military installation called Zayed Military City in Abu Dhabi. The assessment was made around 2020. The situation came to light when American officials requested permission to enter a restricted section of Zayed Military City. They were refused entry. What followed was a dedicated U.S. intelligence collection effort focused on determining what China was doing at a base inside a country that hosts American troops under a formal defense agreement. One former official told Middle East Eye that the U.S. saw parallels between this arrangement and situations where other nations had hosted PLA forces in exchange for economic and financial support from Beijing. This is the language of concern, not speculation, and it shaped American policy toward the UAE for years. This sat alongside a parallel development that had been publicly known for longer, but never fully resolved. In 2021, the Wall Street Journal reported that China appeared to be constructing a military facility inside Abu Dhabi's Khalifa port. The UAE, under intense American pressure, announced it had halted construction and insisted the facility was commercial rather than military in nature. The Emirates maintained that these facilities were not military facilities. But in 2023, documents from the Discord intelligence leaks, classified American intelligence papers published online, revealed that construction at the suspected Chinese facility at Khalifa Port had quietly resumed. And as of December 2025, American diplomats and intelligence officers posted to the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi were still described by sources as deeply suspicious of ongoing Chinese activity at that same port location. Put it together. Chinese military personnel potentially on UAE soil. A Chinese port facility construction that officially stopped and then secretly restarted. Chinese combat aircraft conducting training exercises with Emirati pilots on UAE runways. American forces stationed at another base in the same country. This is not a comfortable situation for anyone in Washington. But here is the crucial point that separates Emirati strategy from recklessness. The UAE has not abandoned America, not by any measure. While all of this Chinese military engagement has been unfolding, Abu Dhabi continued spending billions on American and Western defense systems. In 2022, they paid $2.2 billion for American THAAD missile defense technology, the very system that would later intercept Houthi missiles aimed at Emirati cities. They still host the 380th Air Expeditionary Wing at Al Dhafra. They still fly joint exercises with American forces multiple times per year. In January of 2025, they took delivery of the first batch of French Rafale fighter jets, a purchase of 80 aircraft at a total cost of $17.2 billion, the largest single defense contract in Emirati history. French jets, not Chinese jets. The UAE is simultaneously deepening its relationship with Beijing and deepening its relationship with Paris and maintaining its relationship with Washington. That is not confusion. That is architecture. Deliberate, sophisticated, incredibly expensive architecture designed to ensure that no single power can ever hold Abu Dhabi hostage. The economic foundation beneath this military strategy is equally significant, because the UAE is not buying Chinese weapons out of desperation or ideology. It is buying them as part of a relationship built on genuine economic integration of extraordinary depth. In 2024, UAE-China bilateral trade exceeded $100 billion, positioning the UAE as China's largest Arab trading partner in the world. Chinese companies have invested across virtually every major UAE economic sector, including supply chain management, green energy technology, telecommunications, and manufacturing. In early 2024, the UAE formally joined BRICS, the economic bloc that includes China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and that has been systematically building trade and payment infrastructure designed to operate independently of the American dollar. The UAE is now settling an increasing proportion of its commercial transactions in Chinese yuan rather than US dollars. This is de-dollarization happening not in some distant adversarial economy, but in the country that hosts American air forces and has operated under American security guarantees for over 30 years. When you put the economic weight of that relationship next to the military cooperation, you understand why Washington's pressure on the UAE to distance itself from China has achieved so little. And Washington's pressure has continued to backfire in specific, measurable ways. The F-35 deal remains frozen. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, which has not normalized relations with Israel and which maintains significantly less formal military cooperation with the United States than the UAE, received Trump administration approval to pursue F-35 acquisition. The UAE signed peace with Israel. The UAE hosts American troops. The UAE has a 30-year defense agreement with Washington. And Riyadh, which did none of those things, appears to be ahead in the line for America's most advanced jet. The Israeli veto, Washington's unwillingness to sell anything that might narrow Israel's qualitative military edge in the region, has become the single most powerful driver pushing Abu Dhabi toward Beijing's arms offers. And so, Emirati senior military officials made the journey to Beijing in late April of 2024. They met with the commander of the Chinese Air Force. They discussed the J-20 stealth fighter, 5th generation, stealth, combat radius exceeding 1,000 kilometers, weapons payload of nearly 13,000 kilograms, the precise capability category that Washington refused to deliver. China applied no conditions, no technology restriction requirements, no demands about Huawei, no Israeli veto. Just professional discussions between military professionals about a weapon system and a price. There is a broader historical pattern here that gives this story its real weight. For decades, American military dominance in the Middle East rested on a simple premise. If you wanted the most advanced weapons, if you wanted the most capable fighter jets and missile defense systems and surveillance technology, you had to come to Washington. There was no other option. Russia sold weapons, but Russian systems were increasingly falling behind. Europe sold weapons, but Europeans did not offer the same comprehensive security umbrella. China sold weapons, but Chinese technology was not yet sophisticated enough to compete with American top-tier systems for the most discriminating buyers. That era is over, not ending. Over the combination of Chinese military technological advancement, American political dysfunction in arms policy, and the strategic clarity of buyers like the UAE has permanently altered the global weapons market in ways that cannot be reversed. When a country that also operates American F-16 Block 60 aircraft, French Rafale jets, and American THAAD missile systems is simultaneously conducting full combat integration exercises with Chinese J-10C fighters and KJ-500 AWACS aircraft, China has definitively crossed the threshold into the top tier of global military suppliers. The UAE's stamp of approval is worth more to Chinese defense export credibility than any number of sales to poorer or more politically isolated customers. And that credibility, once established, spreads. Other Gulf states are watching. Other Arab military planners are studying what the UAE has done. The precedent Abu Dhabi is setting in 2025 will reshape Middle Eastern defense procurement for the next 20 years. Look at what has been constructed in the space of just a few years. A country of 10 million people, with 9 million of them being foreign workers, has positioned itself as the indispensable military node between the two most powerful forces on Earth. Washington needs Al-Dhafra. Without it, America's ability to project air power across the Persian Gulf, monitor Iranian ballistic missile activity, and respond rapidly to Middle Eastern crises is severely degraded. China needs the UAE as proof of concept, proof that its military technology is worthy of purchase by sophisticated Western-trained buyers who have operated American and European systems and know the difference. That is the most valuable endorsement Beijing could receive anywhere in the world. And the UAE collects from both sides simultaneously, in security guarantees, in weapons transfers at favorable terms, in massive investment flows, in political leverage that extends far beyond its geographical size. There is one more layer that completes the picture, the layer of what happens when the missiles actually fly. Because the Houthi attacks of 2022 demonstrated something the UAE never wants to forget. In January of 2022, Houthi cruise missiles and armed drones launched from Yemen crossed the Arabian Sea and struck targets on Emirati territory. 3 people died, facilities near Abu Dhabi were hit, and some of those incoming missiles were headed toward Al-Dhafra Air Base itself, the base where American troops were sleeping. The American THAAD systems intercepted some of the incoming fire. American and Emirati air defenses worked together. The crisis was managed. But UAE leaders were quietly furious. They complained that the American response was not immediate enough, that communications between Washington and Abu Dhabi during the attack were not seamless, that the protection offered by American systems was real, but came wrapped in political conditions, bureaucratic layers, and the constant underlying anxiety that American priorities might one day diverge from Emirati priorities. That is the fear that drives every Chinese weapons purchase Abu Dhabi makes. Not ideology, not anti-Americanism, the entirely rational fear that in a genuine military emergency, Washington might be busy elsewhere, might be constrained by congressional debate, might be unwilling to act decisively because of Israeli concerns, or Iranian nuclear negotiation sensitivities, or domestic American political pressures that have nothing to do with Emirati security. The Chinese systems are insurance. The Chinese military exercises are insurance. The Chinese personnel at UAE bases, if that intelligence assessment was accurate, were insurance. Not against America as an enemy, against America as an unreliable friend in a moment of maximum danger. And in the Middle East, where the difference between security and catastrophe can be measured in minutes, no serious leader can afford to have only one layer of protection. Before we reach the conclusion, we need to address one final question that hangs over this entire story. What does the United States actually do about it? What leverage does Washington have left? The answer is complicated because it cuts in two painful directions simultaneously. On one hand, America still holds enormous cards. The US dollar remains the foundation of global trade, and the UAE's financial sector is deeply embedded in dollar-denominated transactions. American technology companies, and particularly the semiconductor firms whose chips power artificial intelligence applications, are essential to the UAE's most ambitious economic modernization projects. The Trump administration, in May of 2025, approved the export of tens of thousands of advanced NVIDIA artificial intelligence chips to G42, the UAE's state-owned AI company. That approval was worth billions to both sides, and it showed that Washington is not willing to simply walk away from the UAE and hand Abu Dhabi entirely to Beijing. But on the other hand, every time Washington uses access to American technology as a bargaining chip in the security competition, it reminds Emirati leaders exactly how much of their future depends on American willingness to remain cooperative. And that reminder is itself a motivation to keep building the Chinese alternative. The trap Washington has built for itself in the UAE is that the more it conditions its cooperation, the more urgently Abu Dhabi works to reduce its dependence on American cooperation. There is no clean exit from this dynamic, only management. Only a gradual, imperfect, often frustrating process of maintaining enough of a relationship with the UAE that the Chinese alternative never fully replaces American partnership, while simultaneously accepting that the American monopoly on Emirati security is permanently gone. That is the uncomfortable new reality that American policymakers and military planners must absorb. Step back now. Look at the complete picture. America's most critical airbase in the Arab world sits 20 miles from a capital city that is simultaneously hosting Chinese military exercises, operating Chinese-built weapon systems, pursuing Chinese stealth fighter acquisition, joining China's preferred economic bloc, settling trade in Chinese currency, and allowing what American intelligence believes may have been Chinese military personnel on its own soil. And America's response has been to refuse more arms sales, attach more conditions, lobby more aggressively, and watch each of those actions push Abu Dhabi further toward Beijing. The era of American military monopoly in the Middle East did not end with a war. It did not end with a dramatic rupture or a formal alliance switch. It ended with a series of refusals, each refusal a gift to China, each gift accepted, each acceptance reshaping the architecture of Middle Eastern security in ways that cannot simply be undone with a phone call or a state visit. American jets still take off from Al Dhafra every morning. American missile systems still protect Emirati airspace. American and Emirati officers still sit together in briefing rooms and plan exercises and share intelligence. All of that is real. All of that continues. But the next time an American official lands in Abu Dhabi, they will land in the capital of a country whose air force trained with Chinese fighters just months ago. A country whose military operates Chinese drones, Chinese training jets, and Chinese air defense systems. A country in active discussion to buy China's most advanced stealth aircraft. A country whose ports may have hosted Chinese military construction. A country whose economy has become so deeply integrated with Beijing that the idea of a clean separation, the choice Washington once tried to demand, is now essentially meaningless. 20 miles and two worlds. That distance between Al Dhafra and Abu Dhabi is the most important 20 miles in global geopolitics right now. And in that gap, you can watch the entire future of American power in the Middle East being quietly, carefully, and brilliantly renegotiated, one Chinese weapons contract at a time.